So this is guide running. It is where visually impaired people run by using a guide like this, running sometimes with a piece of string like this. You could run as fast as this, and sometimes in competition you wear blindfolds that look as fabulous as this. So my PhD was to work out how to guide someone without a guide. And we thought it would be really simple. We look up the research into tools about mobility for the visually impaired, we look into the research into guide running, and then you put the two together to make a PhD, and magically a thesis should come out of it. Except we couldn't find any good research about it whatsoever. So then we conducted the interview to fill in that gap, and then we came up with some results. While we learnt a lot about guide running, we didn't realise how it was performed. My first reaction was to follow some of the guide runners around a park run and simply thematically code the footage. Dr. Mike Frey, my supervisor, thought it was a bad idea because of the amount of variables the outdoors could bring.
What a 42-carat plonker you really are!
So we decided to follow them at athletics tracks, which was a much more controlled environment. The nice thing about the tracks is that they're found everywhere around the country and roughly are all the same size. So with this in mind, we came up with 5 test conditions, and in no particular order they were:
5,
running with a guide on the left-hand side,
4,
running with a guide on the right-hand side,
3,
running with a guide on the left-hand side with no talking,
2,
running with a guide on the right-hand side with no talking, and finally,
1.
running with a guide, but with only verbal feedback.
Thunderbirds are
Before and after each of these runs, we decided to ask how they felt about performing each of these tasks, to work out if perception of the task difficulty matches with the reality of the task. But even this wasn't scientific enough. We needed more quantifiable data to measure how effective guide running was under the 5 conditions. Normally, if you're a sports scientist and you want to measure biomechanics, you could use motion capture. Typically, motion capture is done in a small room in a nice, clean, dry environment and requires someone to have lots of money. The type of money that lets you hire in Benedict Cumberbatch to do stuff like this.
I kill wherever I please, and none can stop me.
And even if you could bring the equipment outdoors, they are typically only used indoors and could not survive a moment outside. All I had was this. So time to build a custom solution. This test footage shows with a bit of coding, you can actually track 2 objects relative to each other. This footage shows by having a reference point on their back, the camera knows how far away they are, and then guess how far the markers are in real time. This final footage shows 2 PhD students running together and using the same principle, but measuring relative distance between them. On top of this, we add another reference point on the other runner to help average out the results, to combat any errors. And this means that you can measure how well the guide is doing by seeing how well the runner is following the guide. Yeah! The only issue now is how to get the data from After Effects into Excel. Surprisingly, this requires a workaround. So, cue the music. Making a box in After Effects and applying a custom code to move the box relative to the answer generated pixels along one axis, converting that data into keyframes and copying and pasting into Excel, converting that data into a graph, removing any anomalous data, putting it back into Photoshop, importing it back into the footage back into After Effects, and then syncing the footage and the chart so you get an idea of what's going on. There are obviously some limitations to this method. It relies on the fact that the camera is perfectly behind them, and because it's not a true representation of 3D space, it can't work out if the guide is ahead or behind the runner. It also has a sizable degree of tolerance. But looking at what comes out at the end is a really good approximation, which is all that is needed for this study. To capture this footage naturally required a steady camera, so a bicycle was used. And smartphones were used for recording, as GoPros could not allow easy framing of the shot in real time while following the running pair. and this is how awesome I looked while doing it. Sound has to be considered as well. Here's a sound from one of the runs directly heard from my phone. It is terrible, which is why we microphoned the guide, so it becomes this.
Watch this, good to your right very slightly, that's it, just keep curving around, you're doing brill.
This allowed us to listen into them and understand why certain actions were made.
Yeah.
Except, this is only the beginning. Finding running pairs who are capable of going around a 400-metre running track and have the time to go at non-peak hours is still a challenge, even if you have access to the whole of England. So, let's talk motion capture. To motion capture in After Effects, we tell the computer to look for similar colours as the previous frames to lock into. In a nice, well-lit environment, this works pretty well. Then, once you tracked it once, you need to go all the way back to the beginning of the footage and track your next point in a similar way. This works out very well in daytime. Shame there's no such thing as daytime in the winter. Instead, most of my footage was taken at night time under spotlights. Spotlights causes bright glare and sharp shadows. So instead of tracking like this, it went like this. This is basically frame by frame animation. This metaphorically did this to the PhD, my computer, and my sanity. Still, no one said a PhD was gonna be easy.
I don't believe this.
Yes! Yes! He's still going! Go on, you beautiful man!
Finally, after 6 months, we got 13 participants doing 5 different runs, recorded on a 30 FPS camera, resulting in excess of 780,000 individual points of data. Because we've only just got into data analysis, I don't have any groundbreaking results yet, but we do have some early observations, and here is some of them. People prefer guiding with both verbal and tactile feedbacks from their guides. Guide running without any verbal feedback is a terrible idea and no one likes it.
Oh yeah, that silent one hard work.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Because they do want to say stuff.
Yeah, well, guiding's all about verbal communication,
Isn't it, mate? Yeah.
More than actual calling now.
Audio feedback proved to be the most interesting, as some people predicted it would be horrible, but after trying it, it was actually the most liberating experience for them.
I think we're in for good scores here.
Thank you all for your time, and this is why I've been staring at buttocks for 6 months.